How do you neutralize a suicide satellite hurtling toward America's GPS command center without firing a single shot? On October 12, 2026 at 0200 a.m., the U.S. Space Force faced this exact nightmare. The target was Object 88 Beta, a rusting Soviet-era husk that suddenly reactivated, locked on a collision course with a critical GPS assert node. It was a perfect trap. If the U.S. fired a kinetic missile, the explosion would trigger the Kessler syndrome, creating a shotgun blast of millions of debris shards that would shred the global internet and destroy the world economy for decades. But if they did nothing, air traffic control goes blind, power grids fail, and banking systems collapse. It was a checkmate scenario in zero gravity. But deep in the black void, American commanders had a secret weapon ready to change the game. Here is how they solved the unsolvable. To understand the magnitude of this threat, we have to go back 48 hours before the crisis, deep into the silent, freezing void of low Earth orbit. This is a region known to military strategists as the graveyard. It is a belt of space cluttered with the rusting corpses of Cold War satellites, spent rocket stages, and thousands of fragments of metallic debris. Among this floating junkyard drifted Object 88 Beta, a heavy Soviet-era communications satellite that had been officially classified as dead for over 2 decades. For years, it was just another piece of space trash, tumbling aimlessly through the darkness. But on Monday morning, the 18th Space Defense Squadron at Vandenberg Space Force Base noticed an anomaly. The tumbling stopped. Sensors picked up a faint, rhythmic heat signature flaring against the cold black of space. This was not a random collision or a battery explosion. It was a controlled burn. The dead satellite had come back to life. As telemetry data poured in, the picture changed from a technical curiosity to a terrified realization. The satellite wasn't just stabilizing, it was maneuvering. It fired its thrusters for a significant orbital inclination change, burning through its remaining fuel reserves with reckless aggression. It began to lower its orbit, cutting through the lower bands of the exosphere like a shark smelling blood. Its new trajectory was intercepting a specific coordinate. Directly in its path sat USA 319, a $1 billion GPS Key 3 satellite that serves as a cornerstone for the entire Western Hemisphere's navigation grid. This was a kinetic kill vehicle, disguised for 20 years as harmless garbage, now waking up to perform one final suicide mission. The mood in the Combined Space Operations Center turned to ice-cold dread. This was a gray zone attack in its purest form. The enemy knew exactly what they were doing. They were weaponizing the laws of physics against the United States. They knew American commanders were paralyzed by a strategic checkmate. The US possesses advanced SM-3 missiles that could vaporize Object 88 Beta in seconds. But the enemy was banking on the fact that the US would not pull the trigger. Why? Because destroying a massive object like 88 Beta at that altitude would create a shotgun blast of thousands of high-velocity fragments. This is the nightmare of orbital warfare. If you shoot, you create a debris cloud that doesn't just kill the enemy, it shreds your own satellites and potentially locks humanity on Earth forever. The enemy had turned the US safety protocols into a weapon, betting that the American president would not risk the global economy to save one satellite. As the hours ticked by, the rogue satellite closed the distance, 4,000 miles, 2,000 miles. Diplomatic channels were silent. Moscow and Beijing denied any control over the defunct object. By 01:30 a.m. on October 12, the diplomatic window slammed shut. The rogue satellite entered the red zone. Its solar panels folded back like the wings of a diving hawk, rushing forward at blinding speed. The Space Force commander had 2 choices: watch a $1 billion asset get smashed into oblivion, or risk starting an orbital apocalypse. The tension in the command center was suffocating. Every second brought the attacker 1 mile closer. But the US military had anticipated this exact scenario. They knew that in a war where you cannot shoot, you have to learn how to wrestle. With 30 minutes left on the clock, the order finally came down: engage the target, but keep the missiles in their silos. It was time to unleash the Guardian. At 01:45 a.m., the secure line to the Combined Space Operations Center hummed with a single command: execute protocol Guardian. This was the moment the trap snapped shut. The United States was not going to fire a shot. Instead, they were going to get physical. 500 miles away, lurking in the radar shadow of a massive commercial array, a sleeper asset woke up. This was the US V-4 Guardian. To the untrained eye, it looked like a maintenance vehicle. In reality, it was a Predator designed for the vacuum. Its electric propulsion system flashed to life with a silent, high-intensity blue-iron glow. The chase was on. Utilizing advanced autonomous navigation, the Guardian executed a high-G burn, cutting across the orbital plane to intercept the rogue Soviet hull. To an observer on the ground, it would look like 2 stars merging. In orbit, it was a terrifying display of precision engineering at 17,000 miles per hour. The Guardian had to match the enemy's velocity exactly. Too slow, and the rogue satellite smashes it to pieces. Too fast, and it overshoots the intercept window. As the distance closed to under 50 feet, the Guardian revealed its true nature. It didn't open a missile silo. It extended a 3-meter, titanium-reinforced robotic manipulator. This was the space tug, concept weaponized, The onboard AI performed 1,000 calculations a second to synchronize with the tumbling rotation of the target. Then, contact. The hydraulic claw lunged forward, clamping onto the rogue satellite's main engine nozzle with crushing force. The impact sent a shudder through the frame, but the grip was absolute. The enemy satellite, now a prisoner, fired its thrusters in a panic, trying to break free, but the Guardian's superior mass held the line. With the target secured, the Guardian executed a violent retrograde burn. It fired its main thrusters against the direction of travel, acting as an orbital anchor. It dragged the enemy out of its stable orbit, wrestling the multi-ton object down towards the gravity well. The kinetic energy bled away instantly. The rogue satellite was no longer a projectile, it was a falling rock. Minutes later, sensors confirmed the kill. Object 88, Beta hit the upper atmosphere over the Pacific, vaporizing into harmless plasma before it could touch the GPS node. No debris field. No Kessler syndrome. A clean, silent victory. The GPS network remained online, the world oblivious to the disaster averted. The Guardian released the wreckage and boosted back into the shadows. But to understand why a robotic arm is more lethal than a nuclear warhead, we must turn to orbital physics. We also need to examine the laser dazzlers, ion drives, and autonomous systems that allow a machine to catch a bullet with a glove. But why use a complex robotic arm when you have a warehouse full of hypersonic missiles? The Guardian's mechanical claw holds a significant strategic advantage in orbital warfare due to the terrifying reality of physics in a vacuum. Here is a detailed comparison highlighting why kinetic destruction is no longer an option. We need to talk about the Kessler syndrome. When a missile strikes a satellite in low Earth orbit, the target does not just explode, it shatters. The impact energy at these velocities converts the structure into a cloud of thousands of jagged shrapnel pieces. In the atmosphere, debris slows down and falls. In space, it stays up there, becoming a permanent minefield. These fragments travel at orbital velocity, roughly 17,500 miles per hour. That is 7 times faster than a rifle bullet. At this speed, a piece of aluminum the size of a marble hits with the kinetic energy of a bowling ball, moving at highway speeds. If the US had destroyed Object 88 Beta with a missile, the resulting debris cloud would have expanded into a shotgun blast, crossing the orbits of hundreds of other satellites. This would create a chain reaction, a cascade of collisions, that could render low Earth orbit unusable for centuries. This is why the Space Force has shifted its doctrine from kinetic kill to kinetic control. But how does a machine like the Guardian actually catch a non-cooperative target moving at Mach 23? This brings us to the most difficult maneuver in spaceflight, autonomous rendezvous and proximity operations, or RPO. To intercept a rogue satellite is not like chasing a car on a highway. In orbit, if you speed up, your orbit raises and you actually slow down relative to the ground. If you slow down, you drop and speed up. This counterintuitive dance requires immense computational power. The Guardian uses a suite of sensors that fuses LiDAR, infrared cameras, and star trackers to build a real-time 3D model of the target. The real challenge is that the target is tumbling. Object 88 Beta was spinning on 2 axes. To grab it, the Guardian cannot just reach out, it has to match the spin. This is called pose estimation. The Guardian's onboard AI analyzes the rotation rate of the enemy hull, predicting the exact position of a structural hardpoint milliseconds into the future. It then fires its maneuvering thrusters to synchronize its own roll, pitch, and yaw with the target. To an outside observer, the 2 satellites appear to be motionless relative to each other, locked in a silent formation flight, while the Earth screams by below them. Once the spin is matched, the robotic manipulator system comes into play. This is a marvel of mechatronics. Unlike the rigid arms used in factory assembly lines, the Guardian's arm possesses 7 degrees of freedom, mimicking the flexibility of a human arm, but with the strength of hydraulic titanium. The end effector, or the hand, of the robot, is equipped with force, torque sensors. These sensors are sensitive enough to feel the difference between a successful latch and a slip. When the arm makes contact, it employs a soft capture technique. Instead of clamping down instantly, the joints go limp for a fraction of a second to absorb the impact energy, preventing the 2 satellites from bouncing off each other. Once the energy is dissipated, the snare cables tighten, creating a hard mechanical lock. But moving a heavy Soviet-era satellite requires more than just a strong arm, it requires a unique propulsion system. This is where the Guardian's ion engines prove their superiority over traditional chemical rockets. A chemical rocket, like the ones that launch ships into space, produces a massive amount of thrust but burns through its fuel in minutes. It is like a drag racer, fast but short-lived. The Guardian, however, is an endurance runner. It uses Hall effect thrusters. These engines use electricity from solar panels to ionize xenon gas, accelerating the ions out of the back of the ship to create thrust. The force produced by an ion engine is small, about the weight of a piece of paper on your hand. But in the vacuum of space, where there is no air resistance, this small force adds up over time. More importantly, ion engines are incredibly efficient. They have a specific impulse or fuel efficiency rating that is 10 times higher than chemical rockets. This allows the Guardian to stalk targets for months, perform complex orbital plane changes, and drag heavy payloads out of orbit without running out of fuel. It provides the delta V necessary to act as a tugboat for the entire fleet. However, before the arm can grab and the engines can burn, the Guardian must ensure the enemy cannot fight back electronically. This brings us to the invisible layer of the battle: electronic warfare. As the Guardian approaches the target, it doesn't just watch, it screams electronically. The enemy satellite is likely transmitting data back to its ground station, sending telemetry or receiving maneuver commands. To sever this link, the Guardian deploys a directional RF jammer. By flooding the enemy's receiver with high-intensity noise on the specific Ku or Kai band frequencies it uses, the Guardian effectively deafens the target. The operators in Moscow or Beijing would see their screens go static just as the attack begins. Furthermore, the Guardian protects itself using optical countermeasures. If the enemy satellite has automated proximity sensors or cameras to detect an approach, the Guardian uses a low-energy laser dazzler. This isn't a laser designed to cut metal, but to blind sensors. By shining a precise beam of light directly into the enemy's optical lens, it washes out the image, rendering the automated defense systems useless. It is the equivalent of shining a flashlight in someone's eyes in a dark room. This combination of soft kill technology represents a fundamental shift in military strategy. In the 20th century, space dominance was about who had the biggest missile. In 2026, it is about who has the smartest autonomous systems. The integration of letter tracking, ion propulsion, robotic manipulation, and electronic jamming allows the US Space Force to neutralize threats without crossing the threshold of nuclear escalation. Let's look at how these systems operate in a coordinated manner to create a defensive screen. The ion engines allow the Guardian to loiter in orbit indefinitely, waiting for a command. The LiDAR allows it to see in the dark. The jammer allows it to approach unseen, and the arm gives it the physical authority to remove a threat. Together, they form a capability that is far more terrifying to an adversary than simple destruction: the capability of seizure. When you blow up a satellite, you prove you can destroy. When you capture a satellite and throw it into the atmosphere, you prove you can control. The mission to stop Object 88 Beta was not just a rescue operation for the GPS network, it was a demonstration of this new paradigm. It proved that in the silent, vacuum warfare of the future, the most dangerous weapon is not the one that explodes, but the one that reaches out and grabs you. For centuries, military dominance was measured by the thunder of artillery and the movement of armies across the land. But the operation to neutralize Object 88 Beta proves that the nature of warfare has fundamentally changed. The next world war will not begin with a bang, but with a sudden, suffocating silence as the networks that power our civilization are severed from above. The Guardian program represents more than just a technological leap, it is the ultimate deterrent. It ensures that the United States can deny the enemy the use of space without destroying the environment we all depend on. It transforms the vacuum from a lawless Wild West into a domain of order and control. As nations race to weaponize the stars, one strategic reality remains absolute. The ultimate high ground is no longer a mountain or a fortress, it is the orbit itself. And the history of warfare teaches us one undeniable lesson: whoever controls the orbit controls the Earth.